Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. Earlier this week, the Miami Herald and Tampa Bay Times reported that the state attorney in Leon County, Jack Campbell, has opened a criminal investigation into Governor Ron DeSantis' decision to secretly divert $10 million from a Medicaid settlement into the Hope Florida Foundation. Money that eventually ended up in a political action committee he controlled. The criminal investigation followed weeks of hearings led by Republicans in the state House, who uncovered the secret transfer of so-called dark money and traced it to the governor's campaign against the marijuana amendment last fall. Republican State Representative Alex Andrade has been the driving force behind the House investigation and turned over his findings to both the U.S. Justice Department and the Leon County State Attorney. DeSantis denies his administration did anything wrong, defended his wife's work with Hope Florida, and blasted Andrade during a press conference this week.
She has led an initiative to help people, and you have one jackass in the legislature, I'm sorry, it's true, who's trying to smear her, smear good people. And just understand what happened. He took documents and he dropped them in a prosecutor's office. That is not an organic investigation. That's a manufactured political operation. That's all this is. Somebody with an agenda dropped off documents, and that's all that custodian of records said. There is no basis to do an investigation on these facts.
After the investigation was revealed, I spoke to Andrade.
I've been very upfront about my opinion about what happened, but I don't have to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm confident crimes occurred and public corruption occurred, and I hope the folks that engaged in those crimes and public corruption face justice. But, you know, this is absolutely, I mean, it's the first step, and it might not lead to anything.
Have you gotten a response from the U.S. Department of Justice as to the material you sent? Have they responded in any way, even just acknowledging that they received it, or said anything beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean they've received it. I've made no bones about it. I've spoken with the Department of Justice, laid out what I believe occurred, but I wouldn't expect to hear anything else. Like, I'll never know unless some charge was ever brought, whether or not they ever investigated it, because that's how they operate, and that's honestly the best way they should.
There are a lot of folks who are suspicious that the Justice Department under Donald Trump and Pam Bondi as Attorney General would take this seriously, would actually do their job in terms of investigating or examining the evidence you provided them. How confident are you, based on the meeting that you had with them, that they will take this serious?
That would be a massive conjecture. $10 million is a lot of money, Jim. $10 million is a lot of money. It's tough to look away, especially when it's Medicaid money. So I don't know if political decisions are being made at all in a charging decision. You know, I like to think our law enforcement looks at the facts, looks at the law, and makes their charging decisions based on what they believe is in the best interests of you know, the members of the public. Like I said, like, I didn't have to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt to be confident to say I think James Uthmeyer committed money laundering and wire fraud. It's up to law enforcement now to decide if they agree with me.
What's been your reaction overall to the attacks that you've sustained?
Anytime someone engages in ad hominem based on an argument I'm proposing, I take it as a badge of honor. It means they can't address the argument I'm proposing. If you can't attack the facts or the law, you attack the man. So, you know, he can't explain why $10 million in Medicaid money was funneled under, you know, false pretenses through a charity to his chief of staff's PAC. And so he's got to attack the person that's pointing out these simple facts. I'm a, you know, simple guy, not running for higher office, happy to be home right now. I just pointed out the obvious, and if he doesn't want to address the obvious, that's on him.
You suggested earlier in the interview that there will be some legislation for the next session to try to curb anything like this from happening again. Have you begun drafting that? Do you have a clear vision in your mind as to what that legislation should be? And can you give us a sense for what that might what it might entail?
Yeah, I'm still brainstorming, but obviously we should put stronger restrictions in place on fundraising from the governor's office because that obviously occurred. We should put some stronger restrictions in place on when state agencies can engage in settlements with third parties and what they can do with that money. We should probably make it criminal to precisely do even what they did on the front end with the settlement. Right now, it's just against the law to do it, right? It's not criminal. There's no criminal penalties for doing what they did, even though it's illegal. I think we should make it criminal. I think we should also penalize state agencies for not producing records to the legislature. I should not have to go to court to get them to respond to my phone calls and produce documents I know that they've reviewed and that they have. I think we should probably more heavily restrict direct service, direct support organizations, DSOs. We should probably more heavily restrict what they do and put more reporting requirements in place because obviously this account was used as a slush fund for the governor's office. That's a circumstance that we should not allow to happen, and we should not create the environment to allow it to be so easy for them to engage in this type of corruption.
In order to get a better understanding of what the next steps will look like, I spoke to former Palm Beach State Attorney Dave Arenberg.
It's very appropriate for the state attorney in that jurisdiction to look at this, especially when it appears to be referral from a leader in the legislature. To ignore it would be to abdicate his responsibility as a chief law enforcement officer in that jurisdiction.
You know, as a former state attorney yourself, what are the steps that this type of investigation would go? What would the first moves that you would make as part of an investigation like this?
The investigators within the public corruption task force that exists inside the state attorney's office would subpoena records, would conduct interviews, and would have to make a decision whether this was a case worth pursuing. And the key here is, was a crime committed? We don't know. I mean, it's not so easy just to assume that there was a crime. I mean, for example, I know that they were talking about money laundering, but money laundering requires the proceeds of specified unlawful activity to be moved around. Here, you have the government taking money and distributing it to a private organization, a charitable organization. That doesn't appear to be money laundering. Perhaps, depending on the facts, it could be investigated for other crimes like organized scheme to defraud or the misconduct by an elected official. Both of those would be felonies, but they're a long way from that. They've got to establish that a crime occurred. You got to have probable cause, and then to actually file the charges, prosecutors demand more than what the police require. They need to believe they can get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. Then there's the question of who to prosecute. So there's a lot of steps that need to be taken before any charges could be filed. And right now, it's too early to know if there were any criminal activities here, and if there were, whether they could get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt and who could be prosecuted for it.
But I guess the idea would be if the ultimate purpose of the scheme to move money from the Medicaid settlement into the charity was really to eventually move that money into a political action committee further down the line, you know, through different contributions and sort of hiding that process. Would that then raise some questions in your mind as to the legality of it?
That sounds a little bit more like official misconduct, which is a felony under Florida law, than money laundering. The Attorney General's office, by the way, does these types of settlements all the time, where instead of money going to the state, they send it to a charity. The difference here is that it looks like there may have been some reports that contradict what actually happened, where they report to the federal government what was overcharged, and it's not consistent with what the state got back. So there are questions that need to be answered, but at this point, there's no smoking gun that would automatically result in charges being filed.
What do you know of Jack Campbell? What kind of a person is he? And should the public have confidence that he will look at this case in a fulsome manner and not through a political lens?
I know Jack Campbell well. He's a straight shooter. He is not partisan. He doesn't, to my knowledge, do anything with the Democratic Party. He's a Democrat, but he's not exactly a party activist. And you know who knows that? Governor DeSantis. Governor DeSantis never even tried to remove the state attorney there, Jack Campbell, because he knows that he acts in a fair, nonpartisan way. Remember, he removed 2 Democratic state attorneys in other parts of the state because he thought they were reform prosecutors, overly partisan. There's never been talk about Jack Campbell because Jack Campbell just does his job. He does so in an apolitical way. And for those who say that this investigation is political, well, the investigation apparently was initiated by conservative Republicans in the legislature, not Democrats. So if you're going to accuse this investigation of being political, the only, I think, true grounds for that claim is that I do think that some of the motivations here from some of the Republicans may be to knock out Casey DeSantis before she ever gets in the Republican primary for governor, because you have Trump supporters who are supporting Trump's candidate, Byron Donalds. But does that mean that the facts aren't the facts? No. Just because you may be motivated by politics, at least in part, doesn't mean that this shouldn't be investigated. Doesn't mean that there's no crime here, because the state attorney's job is to investigate the facts, follow the evidence, and apply the law.
What kind of a timetable can we be looking at? What do you think, though? Obviously, an investigation could take a year or more, but on the minimum side, just to sort of do that preliminary review and gather those records, are we looking at months, 3 months, 6 months? Do you have any feel for when we might learn more about what ultimately is happening here?
It all depends upon what investigators find. Generally, white-collar cases, those investigations take longer because you have to dig through tons of records of paper, and you need the manpower to do so. And here you have the additional question of whether what was done is illegal, because the governor does have broad authority. The laws are pretty broad and vague when it comes to what constitutes an appropriate charitable expense. Now, in thinking, should Centene's dollars that are owed to the state of Florida be diverted to a PAC that's used to oppose a constitutional initiative, that in itself would raise a red flag. But then when you dig deeper and say, well, is it illegal? Can you prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime has been committed? What crime is that? And who committed it? You're not going to throw Hope Florida in prison, but do you charge the attorney general based on his role? Well, if you're going to go after those folks, you got to have the goods. And the goods are not just probable cause. Can you prove beyond a reasonable doubt to a unanimous jury that there was criminal conduct here, not just unethical conduct? You need more than that. You need criminal conduct. So, yeah, this is going to be a tough investigation that will take time for prosecutors.
When we come back, the Florida legislature is still at an impasse over the budget. We'll talk to State Senator Chevron Jones about what is at stake. Stay with us.